Hello and welcome to the DevDC podcast. My name is Shay Reardon, and today we have Greg Nicastro joining us. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Morning, Shay. Great.
Good. So Greg is joining us this morning to talk about his career, speak about what he's seeing in the technology industry, share any insights and advice that he might have for our listeners. So Greg is a security executive turned angel investor, and he has decades of experience working in both small and large organizations. It started with Sun Microsystems, right, Greg, as a product manager. And eventually you were actually the chief product officer of Cloud Health, which was bought by VMware. And that's just part of the experiences that we'll be talking about today. And I know you're building your own consulting business, leveraging these experiences. So that as a brief intro, Greg. Hopefully it was an okay job. Would love to hear a little bit about your story, how you want to tell it, and let's have a good conversation.
Sounds good, Shay. You did a great job with that, actually.
Thanks.
It makes me feel younger, the way you described it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You sound real innovative, which we know you are. Got to keep up with the times.
I'd like to think so. And there are plenty of people around me that'll correct me if I'm not. Let's put it that way. So,
it's getting bad, right?
Yes. So if you want, I can just add a little color around, my background and experience, and then we can go from there. So, the color would be, I got into what I still call the computer industry, software industry, et cetera, in 1982. Part of the reason I got into it was my mom. My mom was actually sort of, and my mom is in her mid 80s now, but she was a tech executive long before there were many women in tech. And, got me turned on to computers and software and stuff in high school. Always sort of made a joke out of the fact that I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player. And she said, yeah, go study something to do with computers and you'll always have a job. And she was, right about that, as it turned out. And so I went to Arizona State University trying to, become a pro ball player, and that didn't work out as she predicted. But I took a lot of computer, information systems courses and got interested in that stuff, was interested, as I said, in high school, and ended up getting a job, in the computer industry and technical selling. And it didn't take that. And I worked for some good, great companies in that regard. I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation and went through their technical training program. And at that time, you had to be more of a geek to be a salesperson. It was a little different than it is. We weren't as dependent upon our systems engineers as we are today. By the way, I'm not making passing any judgment on that. I'm just saying that it is what it is, right? And so, I basically was in tech sales for a handful of years and got that experience, and realized along the way that I thought I was better suited to figure out sort of what should go into the price book, because we actually had price books back then. That as opposed to going and positioning what was already built, it's like, hey, what does the market require, and let's figure that out. And I was more interested in that than I was in actual selling. So I ended up going back, getting an MBA, and transitioning into the product management side of things. And didn't take long for me to be, so I was reasonably technically trained. I mean, it didn't take long for me to get interested in both the specification of like what the world wants, what the market requires, and how we build it, right? So ended up working at Sun for many, as you point out, at Sun for many years. I had a 7+ year stint there, and then was managed to so through that process, got interested enough in what was going on in the small company world. So I actually made another transition. So after being involved with, product management and figuring out what the market requires, I got into, hey, I'd rather do this at a small company where, you feel like you have more of an impact. And so I built a little consulting company where I took cash and equity in small companies, and ended up, a couple of them worked out really well for me. And again, I did product and development oriented work for those companies. One was acquired by Cisco. Another one I helped to take public because I ended up joining them after deciding to make more money doing that than I could, just continuing to do the consulting work. And from there ended up, becoming, so I was part of an executive team that took a company public in '99, a company called Predictive Systems that was in the network infrastructure, the consulting world. And subsequently went on to work at multiple companies. One with Sun Microsystems. I'm sorry, not Sun. Connected Corporation was acquired by, they were a pioneer in sort of SaaS-based PC backup and recovery. They were acquired by Iron Mountain. Ended up becoming an Iron Mountain executive and ran product and engineering for Iron Mountain for many years, and sort of went on from there. And I had a long stint at Veracode in the security world. And then you mentioned Cloud Health, and now I'm back to doing consulting and board advisory work, and angel investing at this stage of my career.
So you've done a lot of different things. And part of this podcast is just talking about how folks should be like considering navigating their career. You said, you don't need to be as much, or now you don't need to be as much of a geek to be a salesperson, right? So that's one part of it. And the other part, I hear you going from starting companies to, being leaders of organizations that are, publicly traded, right? So there's two things that I have a question for you, Greg. Like, one is like large versus small organizations, how folks should navigate that as they look to, I guess, round off their career. And then secondly, like, you're the most diverse background that I've had on the podcast when it comes to being techie, being in sales, being in product management, and now in angel investing. So curious about the value of having a diverse experience when it comes to, I guess, different parts of running a business.
Yeah. So let's start with the first part of it is the things that I managed to derive from large companies, and I think folks can take a bit of a lesson from this, is that they have more money to invest in you, right? So when you're learning and you're trying to grow and build different aspects of a tool set, big co's can put more in. Okay, it just is what it is in that regard. So I think at least what I benefited from was that from some large companies. So whether that was digital or whether that was Sun, both I think made significant contributions to my development as a leader, and as a practitioner, whether it be in the technical selling realm or whether it be in product management, engineering leadership, et cetera. So I think that's what you get from that's one of the things you get from the big companies, and also a network, right? You start to build a network, okay? And then the small companies are, they force you to be able to do a lot of different things, okay, depending on what part of the company, you're in. But that's part of the benefit of small companies, is you kind of have to be, chief cook and bottle washer. You have to be able to, do a bunch of different things. And so that means you got to be comfortable in front of customers. You have to be comfortable in inside meetings with engineers, and I felt that some of the diversity of my, if you will, upbringing in the industry helped with that. And it was more natural for me to sort of traverse the different functional areas with some measure of credibility, right?
Sure.
And so that's what you need to do that, I think, in small co's.
Okay, that's cool. So big companies get the network, they can invest more in you. Smaller companies, you're gonna have to do more things, and therefore you're gonna grow differently. So I see value in kind of bouncing between the two, Now, when we look at your background, like, how do you think having that technology background and also sales background and product management, and now you're an angel investor, has given you like kind of a unique view on where technology is going?
Well, I mean, the practical reality is, technology isn't worth a whole lot unless you understand the problem that you're solving and can communicate to the audience that needs to understand how you're trying to solve the problem, right? So I think it helps, to have enough exposure. And again, it depends on the areas that you're toiling in. Like a lot of the work that I've done in probably the last 10 years of my career, I've actually been, responsible for some of the technology areas, that I ended up building products in, so
Sure.
Use the example of Cloud Health. The reason I got exposed to Cloud Health to begin with was because we were doing a transformation at Veracode, okay, from captive data center to, hybrid to public cloud. And so we had to figure out how to manage the cost associated with the public cloud. We saw a lot of the benefit of that, but how do we manage it? It was a kind of a new area. Fast forward, I ended up going to work for Cloud Health after a long career at Veracode. But that would be an example. You get practitioner as an executive, you get practitioner experience. Well, I know the benefits of moving to the cloud. Okay, I'm going to get more value to customers more quickly if I do that, and I can do it more efficiently. But I'm not going to do it efficiently if I botch the the cost management part of it, right? So you have a company like Cloud Health that's sort of trying to build themselves up from nothing to solve worthwhile problems in the cloud. And thus they did that, but I knew enough about the problem to be able to be, credible about what the solution might look like. So it was helpful, that's just, one example. It was helpful from that standpoint.
I mean, that's a relevant example still today, I think, right? Because you have this experience with like DevOps and DevSecOps, and obviously at Veracode, that's a software company, and they're trying to be more agile, and a way to be more agile is you introduce the cloud. And we're going back to, 2018. When did you start at Veracode? 2012, when it was, when cloud was even less understood than it is today. And I would argue when you picked a good one, right, with Cloud Health, because we look at what just happened with the pandemic, and I think the cloud spend went up like 35% or something like that. But the 35% increase, that 35%, a lot of it was still waste, right? And it was cloud just not used efficiently. So even if we're going back, you were seeing this 8 years before, this pandemic happened, and everyone had to even push faster to the cloud. So that's super interesting. Curious, like what else you're keeping your eye on right now as an angel investor that's like kind of upcoming technology.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a number of different areas that I find interesting. I mean, so security, obviously, I love the security space broadly. I think it's critically important relative to application security in particular, and also sort of infrastructure as code. And because there's just so much, the world is a whole bunch of applications that communicate with each other through APIs, more and more that way, right? It started as the promise, of microservices when we were first doing the transformation at Veracode, right? We were going from Monolith to microservices and communicating through APIs. That's on steroids now, right? That's really, right? So that whole domain and figuring out sort of how to do that securely in an environment where, threat actors only have to get it right once. Okay. Right. The rest of us who are practitioners in and around the world, I use that in quotes, by the way, with my, executive level practitioners, right? Tons in the security world that really are security experts, right? But getting that right, like, is really hard, and human beings can't do it. Okay. Simple. So you have to automate it. So the systems that become more and more intelligent are the ones that, we want to invest in over time, because people can't do that. I mean, even I'm going to pick on one space that I believe in, but I also don't, right? So how many times do people try to train themselves on avoiding phishing attacks? Okay.
Oh, I get so many corporate emails that try to trick me, right?
Right. And here's the thing. Even if you're doing your training, like even if you're doing the self-paced courses that are out there, and that rightly so, like most corporate security organizations are driving, and they should. Come on. I mean, it's still hard. Okay. Even for those of us that understand some of the potential, tricks of the trade out there that can fool you. So human beings are not going to get that. That's an example of a place that needs to be automated. Systems need to be smart enough to be able to defend themselves. Okay. So, and you just need to be able to pick, picking companies that are in certain domains. So that's just one whole domain. Think about all the different pieces to that. I'm talking about.
When you put it that way, it's crazy, right? Because we are getting corporate trainings on how to recognize like little typos and like email addresses that are just a little bit off. And it's like, why can't that be a computer that is looking at that and telling us like, hey, this is a little off.
It's gotta be a computer. Okay. So because we'll never get it right. It's just like, what do human beings do well? That's not what we do well.
No, we're
Okay?
creative, right? Is that what we
Yeah,
do well?
we don't do
Communicate?
that.
I don't know. Make
It ain't
connections.
gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
we're relying on that, and by the way, I think those systems are great. I'm glad there are, all these different solutions out there to do it more intelligently by the day.
Yeah.
I didn't need to pick on phishing in particular, but it's just one that you could just look at it and say, are you really ever going to be able to train people to get this right? No. So you want the systems to become more and more capable, of doing those kinds of things. So I kind of laid out, just think about the web of how, applications are interdependent and what that means. And on top of that, they're inherently insecure unless you're consciously trying to build them to be secure, right? So there's there's multiple industries and multiple segments just in that whole space. So I find that interesting. I also like the RPA space. Robotic process automation. And again, looking at processes that human beings don't do inherently well or efficiently, right? And you got companies out there that now are finally getting, recognized and valued to be able to get after that kind of a space that still, again, is crying out for automation. So again, I could go on and on. Those are some of the areas and some of the rationale for why I think those are the kinds of spaces to look to invest in.
All right, phishing and RPA. I'll tell you, when we get as a employee of a big corporation, or not a big corporation anymore, but when I was at one, when there'd be phishing email tests, we would text each other and let each other know, like the first one that failed it, we'd text all our buddies and be like, by the way, this is a phishing email, so that you don't have to do the required training afterwards, because we would all fail it, So like we, as humans, yes, what humans are good at, right? We're kind of good at getting creative and communicating amongst each other, but we are kind of messing up the system that is there to train us, So it's kind of interesting.
Point is, if you even have to pay attention to that, we
shouldn't. We're already kind of breaking the system anyway. It's a waste of time.
You've already failed, right? If you have to pay attention to it, it's something that just, but again, the broad area that I was really getting at there is this interconnected web of applications that are they're dependent upon one another through APIs. So you can pick on any one of these things. API security. You put the security umbrella over the way modern applications are built and implemented, and there's like no end of things you could do. You layer on machine learning on top of that. I mean, this is why, to me, the advice my mom gave me years and years ago is still relevant today. Okay, get into this business. I'm trying to get my daughter to do it, but she finds it mind-numbingly dull. So
eventually, I don't think she will.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Because it is all kind of connected, and once you start drawing like the connecting the dots, you can realize like how everything you're doing is kind of technology. So I want to ask you like specifically about DevOps, right? Because you're over at Veracode. I see in like your job description that DevOps was something that you're doing at Veracode back in 2012, and DevSecOps is a big part of DevOps when it comes to the security part, and you already brought that up. So can you talk about a little bit about what DevOps meant in like 2012 and where you see it today and where it's going to go?
Yeah, sure. So, back then what we had really was, we had a technology platform that was pretty traditional in my view, in that, it was monolithic, right, in its design and its architecture. As opposed to where we wanted to be, which was more modular and, facilitating that, a microservices oriented approach. Again, we had captive data center versus, public cloud or hybrid in place at that point. But equally important, we had kind of stovepipe functions and responsibilities, right? So I pick on, quality as an example. There are others, and even operations as an example, which was at the time very controversial, right? My view was the separation of the functions, and this is part of what I loved about the whole DevOps concept, okay, was part of the problem, okay? There were handoffs between functions as opposed to being ownership across, an end-to-end offering, right? Which is where I thought we should go, but not just me. I'm a big fan of Gene Kim. So a lot of people follow different people.
Jez Humboldt, Gene Kim, Accelerate. right?
Yeah,
There's a book.
fantastic. I mean, and right, and Gene was involved in that one. Nicole Forsgren kind of took it to the next level. Gene did the whole, DevOps handbook, and then Nicole was involved in really, in my view, mapping that to how high performance companies are high performance software companies, which is really kind of cool, compelling research in her book, Accelerate. But anyway, back then, what were we aspiring to do? Become more productive and efficient, get more, just like we are today. I mean, try to get more value to clients more quickly. And so we happen to be a security SaaS player, but we were a software company, right? And so that's what we were trying to get to. And so my structure was stovepiped itself. So we had to move to change that structure, right? And we also had to move, to a different architecture, a different set of tools, okay? And we were trying to do all of that at a time. And frankly, some of those books and a lot of that thinking helped me inspire the team to realize this is huge. Like this is a huge transformation going on in our business. And so as software engineers and leaders of, software businesses, we've got to embrace this. And it was great that I had a team that was just stellar in this regard. And they had to go through a lot of turmoil and change to move from sort of the stovepipe orientation, to move to different technologies and architectures. And again, why are we doing it? We wanted to be able to deliver more value, more frequently to customers. That was the point, right? That's why we did it to begin with. And it took a lot. I mean, it was you had to do a lot of education at that point, and because people weren't trained to think that way or to operate that way. We were just at the beginnings of shifting left, if you will, for quality, okay, as an example. Right. Left for security as part of quality. That evolved. So the sec bled into the ops. It was DevOps to begin with, because you're trying to, what were you trying to solve for? You don't want to throw code over the wall to operations who have to run it in production. That's how it was back in those days, right? And it still is in some companies today. It's not like
for sure,
right? And so we wanted to blend dev and ops. Again, controversial and difficult from a people perspective. And we also wanted to blend the security, the quality piece to include security, okay? Which again was separate. Security was separate from quality, okay? So again, those were the conditions on the ground then. And so what we were trying, that's what we were trying to solve for. And actually the cloud piece of it was still another vector that was all new, right? But it was facilitating the kind of rapid provisioning. Okay, at that time, that was one of the big benefits, the rapid provisioning, right? So you can get developers up and running and productive very, very quickly, right? That was part of the promise of that. So anyway, that was kind of
and then cloud health needs to come in, right? For whatever you're doing for cloud cost management, if you're provisioning fast. But anyway, I digress. When was Veracode founded?
I think I want to say 2006.
Okay, so they were very much built on a traditional data center, and then you guys are in this hyper-competitive application security space. You get there in 2012. So was like your job to make the transformation from Monolith to microservices, or did it just kind of get thrown your way because you could handle it?
No, this was one of my rare, opportunities to provide some vision. Honestly, I mean, this was
good for you. That's awesome.
Yeah. So although I got full support from Chris Wysopal, who's phenomenal, he's one of the founders of the company, and he was sort of one of my co-conspirators. He knew Gene Kim actually, and I think introduced me to Gene. So again, my charter from my boss was basically, build the equivalent of an innovation factory. So some combination of, hey, we got to innovate, but we also have to make the trains run on time. And so we actually made that our mantra as a software and engineering organization. So that became sort of our mantra, was the idea of we called it IP factory. We even named our organization that. We didn't call it, product or engineering. We called it IP factory. So between the, what the market requires side of it and the, what we need to build and how we build it and how we deploy it, all became part of sort of an organization within an organization. That also include cultural elements, because as you know, that's sort of part of the whole DevOps movement, right? Is what kind of a culture do we want? Sort of And we paid a lot of attention to that. So it wasn't just, but yeah, to answer your question, I was brought in to build something that was predictable innovation, right? So, what could we and deliver on a schedule? Because that's what the largest enterprises in the world wanted from a Veracode. And that's where we were focused on really big enterprises at that time. We had smaller software companies that also were being forced to use us to validate that their software was secure before they could sell that software into large enterprises, right? But the preponderance of our client base were, high expectation, kind of bleeding edge leaders in, hey, we got to secure our applications. And they were realizing early on that the applications kind of became the new perimeter, right? And money wasn't being spent that way back then. And there's much more percentage of security budget now going against AppSec than there was back then. So anyway, yeah. So this was one of my few examples of where I got to bring some vision to the table and say, hey, we should do this a whole different way. And and I got a tremendous amount of support from my boss and the team. More importantly, the team that I was able to bring together to pull it off.
Awesome. So when you when Veracode is creating DevOps, right? You bring the developers and operations together. Did you take this kind of goes back to culture, right? Did you take the folks that were already at Veracode and just make them DevOps, or did you bring in people from the outside that had done this elsewhere? And obviously this is going back before DevOps was what it is today. So
we did both. So we tried to bring in folks that were experts from a consulting perspective to help us make some of the transition. So that was one level of thing that we did. We had people that were, weren't confident yet because in some of the technologies and the approaches, but were open to it, right? So we did a whole change management thing, and I don't mean change management deployment change. I mean cultural change and true change management. Like, how do you get people to understand that it's worth going through the pain to get to the benefit, right? So we paid a lot of attention to that. So we did a little bit of both. Happily, most people were excited to be part of it and to be part of the transformation. And we were able to, maintain the folks that we had. And then we added people over time that had more experience with that. There were companies out there already that were pioneering some of that stuff, and we were trying to pick up more talent that could help lead us.
I was wondering where you get that talent from at that point. Like what organizations were ahead of Veracode?
There weren't that many, and it was leaning on consulting. It was leaning on consulting companies that were kind of thought leaders in the space to help us with some of that. I mean, because you're talking about multiple levels of this. There's cultural aspects, there's technical tooling, there's architecture. So there's a number of different levels. So we were able to maintain those that wanted to stay and wanted to embrace what we were doing. And that was the preponderance of the people there. We had great people at Veracode. So, and then we attracted more great people to that. One of the founders used to talk about the idea that, each person needs to, create another level of awesomeness to the awesome team that we already had. And we also had a culture that was unique in that most companies, they want you to prove yourself. Before you can really make an impact, somehow you've got to kind of make your way to some credibility gate. We didn't have that. Our view was the gate was the interview. Once you were on board, like once we decided that we wanted you, we expected you to contribute and bring new ideas and do things differently than we did it day one. We weren't surprised by the fact that people wanted to do things differently than we were doing them. We wanted that, right? So that was part of, again, great culture, between the founders, the CEO, the executive staff.
And that's why you hire great people, right? So that they can tell you what they know. Not so you can wait to hear if they can prove themselves.
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if I couldn't hire great people, because I wasn't going to be able to do anything on my own. That was evident for a long time.
I like the quote, innovate, but make the trains run on time. You also have another good quote, getting better at getting better. Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe how it started and what it means to you?
Yeah, a couple of different things. So first of all, when I went back to business school, I studied quality. That was one of the things I studied. I studied, I got my MBA, but my focus area was on manufacturing planning and control systems. And I got really interested in, as a result, I got really interested in quality. And a lot of the reason I'm interested in techniques and improvements in how to make software, and got really drawn to what Gene Kim's doing and others, a lot of the original Agile folks and whatever, is because of that. Okay, so I have a propensity to be interested in that stuff and applying those things, to software. The idea of continuous improvement underpins the notion of getting better at getting better, right? So that's critically important, and it's critically important to almost any system that you're going to use to build anything, whether you're building automobiles or whether you're building software. Okay, they're different, but there's a lot of pieces that apply. The actual phrase, though, getting better at getting better, is the brain work of a guy by the name of Tom Hickman, who's a senior engineering leader in our industry, who is amazing, one of the most brilliant guys I've ever had the privilege to work with. And he came up with that because when we were trying to do what we were doing at Veracode in 12 and 13, we were trying to add sort of metrics and measures, because you can't manage what you can't measure. And that hasn't changed since. There's just new techniques, new software to do the measurement and whatever, right? So he invented that whole notion. And that became part of the culture of the Veracode, specifically the Veracode IQ factory. So getting better at getting better was part of our sort of credo. And he invented it. Tom Hickman came up with that one. So, nice. And he's nice. Great. He's out there. He's doing great things. And so anyway, yeah, he's the one that invented that name.
It's funny how you're able to tie like a lot of things together that have existed prior in history, right? Because what you studied for your MBA, from the outsider perspective, maybe you can explain this to your daughter, maybe get her excited about technology. That isn't tech, but then we're talking about getting better and getting better and continuous improvement, and that is like DevOps, right? And that's what Gene Kim's trying to measure, right, with the accelerate metrics and all that.
Right. And we use that stuff. I mean, to this day, part of what I do is consult on some of that. And the metrics that are in the book Accelerate, and that he was espousing, in even before he wrote the book on the DevOps handbook, is all that stuff. So are we measuring those things? Are we pushing multiple times a day, or is it a quarterly or annual release? Yeah. Okay, time to resolve issues in production, change failure rate. I mean, all those things. Again, that's the stuff that makes people's eyes glaze over, but it's actually what underpins the work. It's part of the way to measure the work. So
it's why you make these investments in both time and money, is for the outcome of these metrics. And if you're not keeping track of them, though they might make your eyes glaze over as you're naming the 4 Accelerate metrics, you're going to spend, months, years, and hundreds of thousands, millions trying to track these, or trying to chase these down. If you're not tracking them, you could be totally wasting all your time and money. So exactly. You mentioned your consulting firm, right? So Troy Innovations, a little Star Wars plug. Can you tell me about, like, I'm sure you're super busy with it right now. Can you tell me what you're up to, who you're consulting for, and how it's going?
Yeah, so basically what I do now really is a combination of mentoring executives that do sort of what I've done in my career, and also CEOs at growth companies that, maybe a lot of the CEOs come from sales backgrounds, right? And, aren't as familiar necessarily with like running, if you will, an IP factory kind of a setup. So I help with that. I also do more generic. I've been a CEO in my career as well. So I also do, sort of team building consulting, which I think a lot in culture oriented consulting work. So helping folks, who know that they don't have an optimal culture, or know that they don't have an optimal team setup. And I leverage some of Patrick Lencioni's work to do that. So if you've ever read the book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick has a whole bunch. He has a consulting company called The Table Group. So I leverage that material, and I've grown to really, really like it. And it can apply across leadership teams, across functions, and also, inside of, product and engineering organizations. If you don't have good team chemistry and frankly understand how to have constructive conflict and get people comfortable that they had their say and now they're buying in and they're committed to the result, you won't get the performance that you want, right? So you have to put time and effort and energy against that. I think often, I try to help with, there's all kinds of tooling in all these areas. Okay, and every product company wants to try to differentiate its tools and so forth, and that's great. I mean, that ecosystem's critical, but to me, human beings make all this stuff happen, and so I try to put a significant amount of time into that. So that's part of what I mentor and coach on is, how to make teams that are effective and cohesive. And I think that has a big impact on anything. You're going to try to pull off a DevOps transformation. You have to have a team that understands how to work together. So I think I do a big chunk of that kind of work. I also do, like I said, some modest angel investing as well as board work. I'm an independent director on a couple of different companies. And the reason for that is that more and more of these companies are becoming software companies, right?
Yeah, totally.
And as a result, to have somebody that has, has this sort of general background in, software development, product development, and as well as some of the other things I've done career-wise is helpful for some of these companies to be there as an independent director. So you can influence not just that function, but the way the company's being run. So that's part of what I do as well. And again, Counselor Troy was Star Trek Next Generation, okay? Just to be clear, not Star Wars. Although I love Star Wars.
Oh, geez. I'm glad you brought that up. Oh, man. You should have told me that right off the bat. It's embarrassing. This is all recorded here. You know how many engineers I talked to about Star Trek and Star Wars and geez.
Yeah. Well, no any engineer listening to this, okay, that's a geek that was like I watched
I'm all red now.
I watched the black and white versions of, of the old Star Trek. I mean, I got interested in Star Trek sitting in front of a black and white TV, looking to see the beginning of the ship coming at me. Okay, on this little dot. Yeah. Anyway, so I had to. I
love your passion about DevOps and this.
So anyway, and I love Counselor.
You're a well-rounded individual.
Yes. I don't know about that, but I'm certainly into Star Trek, and I'm interested in topics like the underpinnings of DevOps, not just the tools that are out there or the different, sort of banners that people are waving about it. I'm interested in actually how the workflows work, and the tooling is useful in the context of making all that stuff work. That's the main.
All right, so I'm gonna lay out 3 takeaways. Obviously, there's a lot here. So I kind of want to bring it back to get into the computer business, right? Your mom directed you that way. I'd say that's a takeaway for our listeners here. And then I like your conversation or your thoughts around what's going to take off, right? With phishing and RPA and just automation in general. And then I do like the quote, innovate, but make the trains run on time, right? Like a lot of organizations right now are going through a transformation that you guys did, you helped lead like 8-9 years ago. And it's about striking that balance between moving faster for tomorrow, but making sure you're delivering what the end user needs today as well. Before we wrap up, Greg, it was a great conversation, but is there anything else you want to leave us with before we continue on with our day?
Yeah, I have one that I would chip in there. I've heard this said, and I totally agree with it. I don't think we walk this particular walk in our industry, but I want to get this off my chest. Culture actually does eat strategy for breakfast. The challenge is most investors and most board members and most operators pay lip service to it. Okay. And so part of what I do now is make sure that no matter what, board I'm on, whatever room I'm in, whatever consulting, I'm always paying attention to that, right? So we get paid to figure out the appropriate strategy, but without the appropriate culture, you'll never pull it off. It's a fantasy. So that's what I would leave you with. And I think what it means to be a good team member as you're thinking about your career. Again, I love capitalism, but one of its inadequacies is that one wins at the expense of another. And that's not the case in making software on a schedule, okay, that people want to buy. So keep that in mind. Become a good team member, understand what it means to be on an effective team, go to school on that stuff. That'll do more for your career and for our industry than almost anything else.
Love it, Greg. When you bring up culture, obviously there's a lot of transformations happening right now. And I think it's very clear that there's a talent shortage, right? And you could have the hottest tech right now, but if someone's working for you and they could be a great engineer, a great sales rep, and they didn't think that they were treated the right way during this pandemic, they're gone, and then someone else's number two or whatever can probably catch you, because they're just,
Yeah.
you need good people to work for you to scale. And if you don't have a good culture, you're not going to keep them.
Absolutely. And as a result, I couldn't agree more. And you've got to pay attention to it. It's got to be one of your OKRs. It's actually got to be something you actively manage. Okay. Don't think that just because you pull everyone together for beers at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, that's your culture orientation. Okay. You better have a program to attract and retain people, right? And to get people invested. And if you don't, you'll be at a disadvantage, okay, as a business. But I think people should be, those of us who, again, you're talking to some people who are just at the beginnings of their career, some that maybe are in the middle, and different disciplines, technical and otherwise. I think having that front and center and being able to contribute to that is really, really important, and demanding it. It's one thing for an employee to demand something. It's another thing for them to demand it and say, I'll do it. Like, I'll help you with it. Here's my idea.
Right.
Here's what I think we should do to attract and retain more talented sales executives, or, engineers, or whatever it is. So anyway, I think that culture piece, again, often paid lip service to and not really executed against. And, that's one of my things. So you gave me the opportunity to dismount with at least some commentary, editorial commentary. You got it.
So Greg, it was great having you on during this time. We try to bring value to the listeners. Obviously, you have a great background in being both in sales and technology. A lot of the focus of our audience is on progressing their career within technology, and you hit a bunch of different aspects of that, whether it's large or small or technical or otherwise. If there's listeners out here that think that they would be good guests, go ahead and reach out to me directly. If folks have suggestions for people to bring on, please reach out to me as well. But until next time, thank you again, Greg, and have a wonderful day.
Okay, much appreciated.